everyone. Good evening. I'm Shreya Dhondial. As always, it is good to see you. Novak Djokovic is the world #1 in tennis. He's also the defending champion at the Australian Open, where he and his fiercest rival, Rafael Nadal, are chasing a record 21st Grand Slam title. But Djokovic, as most people know, is also a champion vaccine skeptic, someone who has bafflingly opposed vaccination rather publicly. When he asked for a special exemption to take part in the Australian Open, well, he got it. He's after all the defending champion. And then began the drama. The Serb was detained at the Melbourne airport. His visa was cancelled for failing to meet COVID vaccine requirements. His deportation was imminent till he challenged it in court, and now he gets to stay in Australia in a hotel till Monday. That is still a final decision is taken on whether he can participate in the Australian Open that starts on the 17th. A year after vaccination started around the world, vaccine hesitancy is still a real thing. It's real in Australia and Serbia, in France, in the US, and even here in India. We have a report for you on that on Debrief. But can a champion be this irresponsible? That is your debrief this evening. Let's start with how Novak Djokovic collided with Australia's tough border laws and started a diplomatic war between Serbia and Australia.
On January 4, it was a routine pre-Grand Slam departure for Novak Djokovic. Even as he posted this customary tweet before taking a flight to Australia, he seemed to have served a double fault. Arguably modern sport's greatest tennis player and a phenomenal athlete, the 34-year-old Grand Slam record holder is also a controversial anti-vaxxer. Not only did he invite the world's ire by holding an exhibition series in the middle of a raging pandemic, but he has also refused to get jabbed. It is Tennis Australia's controversial decision to grant him exemption from vaccination that has sparked a massive outrage in Australia and across the globe. In Australia, public sentiment seems to be clearly against the champion player.
People in the state have done it pretty hard over the last couple of years, and I think there is an anti-vaccine sentiment here. So anyone who comes out against vaccines and health protections is not going to be really well received.
It was quite natural that the Serbian was stopped at the airport by the officials on arrival, and after several hours of deliberation, they revoked Djokovic's visa and ordered his deportation for not meeting entry rules. Clearly, public outrage forcing the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison to crack the whip.
Rules are rules. The ABF has done their job. Entry with a visa requires double vaccination or a medical exemption. I'm advised that such an exemption was not in place, and as a result, he is subject to the same rule as anyone else.
Despite Team Djokovic's vehement opposition to detention, citing Tennis Australia clearance, the tennis superstar was first held at the airport and then taken to a government detention hotel. Djokovic's lawyers filed an urgent appeal in court, and his deportation has been put on hold till Monday. But the matter has led to a political fallout between the Australian and Serbian governments. Even as Australian Prime Minister tried to diffuse the diplomatic tensions, Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić has slammed the harassment of their national hero. Serbia seems to have put its weight behind its #1 sports icon to deliver him justice. Ardent fans of Djokovic are not pleased. Several pro-Djokovic protests were witnessed in the streets of Melbourne. They did not mince their words while slamming the authorities.
Why didn't told him before he came to Australia? Why now? I'm asking so many questions. Andrew and Scott, what are you doing to us? I'm proud that I'm Australian. I'm here 26 years nearly, and I love Australia, but now what you doing? That's shame of you.
The battle will now be fought in the court in the coming days, with the Australians demanding the player be deported, while his fans are out in full voice supporting him. But as far as Djokovic is concerned, a string of personal comments amid pandemic has put his immediate personal future in jeopardy. With Narayan Muralidharan for CNN News 18.
Now, Melbourne, where the Australian Open is held and where residents have endured some 256 days of lockdown, there is very little sympathy for Mr. Djokovic. But there is some sympathy coming his way from rival Rafael Nadal, who has said, and I'm quoting him now, he says he made his own decisions and everyone is free to do that. But there are going to be consequences as well. In a way, he says, I feel a bit sorry for him. Let me go across to someone who is, again, feeling a bit sorry for what is happening to Novak Djokovic. This is former tennis player Manisha Malhotra. Manisha, thank you very much for being here. Australia is a country that is seeing 60,000 daily cases, long waits, 6-hour waits for people to get tested, and then a 1-week wait for people to get their results. What was Mr. Djokovic thinking and expecting?
Yeah, it's been an unfortunate situation. I think that, it's one of the prices you pay for fame. And it's in this case, it's really not helpful for Novak, who had the clearance and wouldn't have gone if he didn't get the clearance, but only to be stopped at the airport and, kind of turned into this huge hue and cry. And now the legal people are involved. So it's taken a whole different turn.
You also blame Tennis Australia because, after all, he was given a medical clearance. And many people are saying that he was given a medical clearance simply because he is the defending champion. He is the world #1. And what do? If a champion asks you for a clearance, you give it and then you put him in this embarrassing situation.
No, I don't think that this is something that is Tennis Australia's fault. I think that there was a handful of people who there were about 25 or 26 people who had applied for a medical exemption. And there are certain protocols for that medical exemption. And what Tylee said and what everybody, what the organizer said is that they went through the state protocol and then, there's it's an anonymous application where people don't know who they're kind of applying. And a handful of those were given the medical exemption. So Djokovic was one of those. And if it is true that this was how the process played out and it was done through the state authorities, I don't think that this has anything to do with Tennis Australia, and it's not really their fault. They've kind of followed the rules and they've done what was needed. So now I'm not sure whose fault it is, but it's very unfortunate.
But we've known his stand as far as vaccines are concerned. The world knows it. It's a baffling stand. I want to ask you, champions can talk about choice, but can they really afford to be this irresponsible? Don't they, more than anyone else, have a greater social responsibility? And this is someone who, just by the way, has already come down with COVID at least once.
Well, I mean, I think that well, as a human being, I think everybody has a choice, firstly. But when you are a celebrity and when you are in the limelight, I do believe that you have some certain debt to society, maybe, or even to kind of the whole environment where you are looked upon and you have this added weight on your shoulders. So you kind of have to make a choice that would be the best for the greater good. And in this case, we all know that it's proven that vaccines help and vaccines are saving lives. So it's a very tricky situation. And I think that there are several athletes who are anti-vaxxers and who have not taken the vaccine, and these are very elite level athletes. I mean, Kyrie Irving is one, Aaron Rodgers is another one, to kind of name a few. So on one hand, yes, I do believe that he should probably just kind of go with what is correct and what the right scientific evidence is showing. But on the other hand, I mean, he is a human being, and as a human being, he's allowed his choice. If it's not affecting others, or if it's not putting others in danger, then I mean, it's hard to kind of say one way or the other.
Manisha, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much. It's not just Australia where there is anger against the anti-vaxxers. In France, which reported a record high of over 3 lakh COVID cases just yesterday, President Emmanuel Macron has decided to hassle, quote unquote, the 5 million people who are refusing to take the jab. Now, in a rather controversial choice of words, he said, and I quote, "I really want to piss off the unvaccinated." He went on to say that he will not put them in prison, but ensure their life becomes a little difficult. With the result, France has now passed a law under which those not jabbed cannot take part in social, sporting and cultural activities, which essentially means you cannot go to a restaurant or a theatre or a sporting event. The opposition has likened it to waging a war against the unvaccinated. When France started vaccinating its people last year, the country had one of the highest rates of hesitancy in the world. But with a mix of inducements and pressure, the government pushed millions to get the shot. As a result, 90% of France is fully vaccinated, but the remaining 10% are proving to be a bit of a challenge. We saw vaccine hesitancy here in India as well when we began our vaccination program on 16th of January last year, almost a year ago. We got over it, managed to get vaccinated 90% of us with the first jab. The goal was to double vaccinate every Indian adult by the 31st of December. But we are still stuck at 64%. Why is that? Because there is a hesitancy in rural India to take the second jab. Take a look.
The third wave is well and truly here. Omicron has quickly become the dominant strain. But India's vaccination coverage is far from satisfactory. It's been nearly a year since India's COVID vaccine drive kicked off, but only 45% of the adult population is fully vaccinated. The target was to vaccinate the 94 crore adult population by the 31st of December 2021. Not only has that been missed, the pace of vaccination appears to be slowing down. In September last year, 78.7 lakh doses were administered daily on an average. That number fell to 55.8 lakh doses in October. It didn't really pick up much pace in November and December. The first 5 days of January saw just 44.7 lakh average daily doses given to adults. More than 18 crore unutilized vaccine doses are still available with states and union territories. The supply constraints have been addressed, but hesitancy appears to be looming large. In December 2021, a survey conducted by local circles estimated that 6.96 crore Indians are hesitant to take the vaccine. The reason? Fear of side effects, doubt over effectiveness of the vaccines, and underlying medical conditions. Nowhere is the hesitancy more prevalent than rural India. Take poll-bound Uttar Pradesh and Punjab, for instance. Just 32% of UP's population have received 2 doses. The figure for Punjab stands at just 31%. But states have their own ways to overcome this hesitancy in rural India. A Gram Panchayat in Maharashtra's Nanded has banned entry of those who are unvaccinated. In Rajasthan's Jodhpur, free cooking oil is on offer in lieu of jabs. And in Hingoli in Maharashtra, LED TVs, refrigerators and washing machines are being offered if you get fully vaccinated. Whether these incentives work is yet to be seen. But as more and more experts advise, the vaccine is the only way to beat Omicron or any other variant that may come in our way. With Rajiv Kumar, Anisya Kumar for CNN News 18.
Let's try and understand what is the level of vaccine hesitancy we are still seeing in India and what the data is telling us. Chandrakant Leheria is joining us. He's an epidemiologist. He's also a public health specialist. Dr. Leheria, thank you very much. Almost 12 months into India's vaccination program, I do remember initially there was vaccine hesitancy. Then that vaccine hesitancy evaporated, which is why we have 90% people vaccinated, at least with the first jab. But when it came for the second jab, it seems we are still stuck at 64%. Where is this hesitancy coming from?
So on 16th of January, we will complete a year of start of COVID-19 vaccination in India. We have seen a life course of vaccination program in this period. Initially, there was a lot of vaccine hesitancy. Then there was a vaccine demand or hesitancy had disappeared and there was a high acceptance. But now we know that while first dose coverage, or at least dose 1 coverage has gone up to 90%, but second dose coverage remains low, and there is a wider gap between the first and second dose. We really do not know which are the population group which are hesitant about COVID-19 vaccination, especially second dose. But we also need to remember that if people were hesitant, then coverage would not have been 90%. So there is a more of a vaccine complacency now that people received first shot because they were accepting the vaccine, but now they are complacent that either COVID-19 pandemic is not that severe or disappeared. And that is a key challenge. if government wish to understand that which are this population, then government should utilize the available data from COVID dashboard, that whether those people are in which state, which district, which block, and even to which villages, and then identify which subpopulation group, male, female, and different segregators or parameters. And that way we can recognize those population and appropriate intervention can be taken. But for me, as the Indian government data is not available in public domain, it's difficult to say that which are the population group which are complacent in the receiving second dose.
Dr. Leheria, smaller states seems to have done very well. States like Himachal Pradesh, states like Uttarakhand, Jammu and Kashmir as well. Why is it that smaller states are doing well and the larger ones, Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, etc., are lagging behind? More worryingly, because there are elections in Uttar Pradesh and Punjab.
So, well, if we will look at the traditional or childhood vaccination program in India, we know that these are the states which have done really well in COVID-19 vaccination program, are also the state which do really well in childhood vaccination program. Himachal Pradesh, Punjab, Jammu and Kashmir, these states, including Kerala, these states traditionally are the one which have a high coverage with traditional vaccines. So this reflects that the performance of the vaccination program in those states, service delivery in those states, and these states are doing better. The states such as Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Bihar always had a lower childhood vaccination coverage. So the behavior parents show toward vaccinating their children, they show to themselves also. And that reminds us that if we want to achieve a higher coverage with any health intervention, be it vaccines or anything, it takes many years of work to engage with those communities before high coverage could be achieved. I think another challenge is that COVID-19 vaccination, this is the first time that any at large scale adult vaccination program has started. And this is a challenge for such population. So we need to further study and utilize this opportunity to address those challenges.
My last question to you, people, healthcare workers on the ground, researchers seem to be suggesting that in rural India, there is some degree of hesitancy when it comes to the second jab. Is that something you're hearing as well? And why is it?
So I would like to see more data on this. The reason is that we know that while access to vaccination centers is far easier in urban settings, in rural India, in the initial part, like the majority of the first shot had been administered in a more of a large-scale drive mode where vaccination services were taken to the villages and people were vaccinated or administered the first shot. Now, with the nearly all states achieving good coverage with the first shot, and now attention on the either precaution shot or vaccination of children, the attention has disappeared. Also, we know that the vaccine supply is far more than the demand now, but we need to remember that mere aggregate supply does not mean better access for the people. So it is very much possible that for rural citizens, the access to vaccination centers is still a challenge. The people still need to go to a different village or a 5 kilometer or 7 kilometer to get vaccinated. So government definitely need to examine that whether in the rural setup, those kind of people who want second shot of vaccine, do they have easier access? It might be very much required that a special drive to cover village by village drives need to be conducted to ensure that people who want and who are eligible for second shot receive their second shot on time. So it is very much possible due to access issue rather than people not willing to come forward and get vaccinated.
Okay, Dr. Leheria, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you for this very quick chat. Let's now talk about a country that is done with the second dose, that is done with the third dose and is now on to its fourth dose. Israel is administering fourth doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine to people over the age of 60, healthcare workers and the immunocompromised. The country says a fourth jab is showing a 5-fold rise in antibodies.
Let's do it.
Yet another shot in the arm. This, says the Sheba Medical Centre, is the first time in the world healthy subjects are receiving a fourth shot of COVID vaccine.
Well, I don't feel much as a guinea pig. My own immunity has dropped below the threshold, and therefore not only am I myself potentially exposed to the Omicron, but more importantly, I might be a potential hazard to my heart transplant patient that I'm taking care of.
His colleagues, all of whose antibody levels have also dropped, were lining up to play their part in this trial, designed to show if a fourth shot of the Pfizer vaccine is safe and effective. Sarit here is among the first of 150 health workers at the Sheba Medical Center, just outside Tel Aviv, to receive the fourth dose of the vaccine. It's not the much publicized rollout of the fourth shot campaign, but it could be a step in that direction. That, at least, is what Prime Minister Naftali Bennett seems to want. Last week, he welcomed the decision by a panel of experts to recommend the additional booster for over 60s, health workers and people with suppressed immune systems. But the Health Ministry's Director General has yet to sign it off. Some health experts remain unconvinced.
I didn't think that it's right now at this moment. It may change in a week. It depends on what we see is happening in England, what's happening right now here. If we see that there's more severe disease, maybe it will be correct. I think that's why it's so important to start a research as soon as possible.
Initial results from this study are expected by the end of the week, by which time Israel's rising COVID caseload will likely be even heavier. Elliot Gotkin, CNN, Ramat Gan, Israel.
Israel's experience with the fourth dose will be very helpful when other countries decide to go for one. Up next, we are getting you a report from China, where its radical COVID measures have some people begging for food. That report up next. Do stay with us. China is experiencing its largest outbreak of COVID since the pandemic began 2 years ago. The country's zero COVID policy, however, is wreaking havoc on over 13 million people who are under a stringent lockdown. Some are being forced to beg for food.
No eye contact from this anti-pandemic worker as a woman under lockdown pleads for a basic essential and her dignity. Through tears, she says, "My period came yesterday. I called the hotline, the police, CDC, but no one responded." CNN can't confirm the authenticity of the video. Residents in the Chinese city of Xi'an, which has seen the largest community outbreak of COVID-19 since Wuhan, say they continue to struggle to get basic supplies and food. The municipal government concedes that there are some problems and said it's working on improving the situation. Since December the 23rd, this city of 13 million has been under strict lockdown. Residents are forbidden from leaving their homes unless it's for a COVID test. There has been public shaming of people accused of breaching COVID-19 safety laws, and a man was beaten by government COVID prevention workers for breaching lockdown. The workers were later punished after this footage emerged online.
In Xi'an, there are instances of people being turned away from hospital because of COVID protocols. In a disturbing video, a pregnant woman was allegedly turned away because she didn't have a valid COVID-19 test. And according to the post from a Weibo user who claims to be her niece, the woman is seen sitting outside the hospital with a pool of blood around her feet. Hours later, she was finally admitted, but ultimately suffered a miscarriage. A staff member from Xi'an Gaoxin Hospital told CNN they were investigating the incident and that the hospital had initially turned away the woman in accordance with the government's COVID-19 rules.
Officials have vowed to achieve community zero COVID before lifting the lockdown. In many ways, China's zero COVID policy has been a huge success. It has curbed local outbreaks and saved lives with mass testing and tracing, snap lockdowns and travel restrictions. But in Xi'an, patience has been pushed to the limit. The Eurasia Group placed China's zero COVID policy at the top of its list of global risks for 2022, anticipating a cycle of infections, lockdowns, disruption, and discontent that would rock the global economy. The Winter Games will pose a big test to China's strategy. Experts say people in China are vulnerable because of their lack of exposure to the Omicron variant, the lower efficacy of its homegrown vaccines, and the limits of zero COVID.
Even in China, will there ever be any zero COVID?
I don't think so. Actually, to live with COVID is actually the direction to go.
In Xi'an, the number of new cases is decreasing, but desperation is growing as the lockdown enters a third week. Christy Lou Stout, CNN, Hong Kong.
Xi'an is China's biggest COVID challenge since Wuhan. They are dealing with it the way they have dealt with Wuhan in the past. With that, it's a wrap from me. Thanks for watching. Good night.